thank you, Julie, for being with us in Strasbourg and taking some of your very precious time to talk with us about your work around Theory U. In Strasbourg, where I've been here now for just over 3 years, and I have implemented an institute which is working on innovation and teaching and learning in higher education. And we're trying to be innovators, to reform higher education, which is a great job, rather challenging at times. And while I was sort of starting off, one of the things that really helped me was I came across Theory U and I read Otto Scharmer's, and I took part in the MOOC with my colleagues and other colleagues. And it has been really helpful and insightful for us to understand what's going on and what type of context we're doing this innovation in. We find that yes, we all feel this urge to innovate, to do something new, to step out of our routines. And, but we're also noticing that the context can be quite challenging and very disruptive. And I can remember when we were first met and talked about this interview, I was sort of stating that, yes, this is France. Remember, it's France. It's very rigid and very, there's lots of crisis going on. And you stopped me and said, yes, but that's going on everywhere. So could you tell me more about what, because you're working on a sort of global level, what are you observing and noticing about us, the innovators trying to stand up and go ahead?
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's always nice to stay connected with people who are doing the work into all the different fields. And yes, I remember our first conversation, and many people are so within a certain context, a certain sector, and have the feeling that it's particularly rigid there. And all I wanted to say at that point was, it's everywhere. Of course, every context is unique. Even every little institution is unique, but there is something universal about what's going on in the world. I think on some points we're really hitting a wall of that the past no longer is serving us. We don't have the answers anymore. Whether you look at energy, whether you look at healthcare, whether you look at mobility, and education is one of those sectors that is really in transformation, and that I see all over the world, innovators stepping up and saying, there must be something else different, something different possible. And what are those possibilities?
True enough, that was very helpful when I heard you bring this information in, because it gives a sense of hope. Okay, we are faced with challenging situations, but we all are doing it. So how can we share this, and how can we learn from our various experiences? So because I'm working in education, I would be interested in, are you doing anything particular in higher education or in education that could be helpful to our own process?
Yeah, I think, you know, I work for the Presencing Institute with Otto Scharmer, who in himself is an educator at MIT, so in higher education, and is working with his students in a very new way about change in economy, but also change in education. So if you see what we are doing as Presencing Institute is for us in itself an experiment, a prototype in how can you do things differently? How can you shift the relationship between the educator and the student, between the institution and the educators, and between the institution and the local community, the lives people are having in. So you go from student-centric, from teacher-centric, educator-centric to student-centric. And that movement is a movement that we see in the work we do, but also, for example, in China, where we kicked off just recently in the beginning of May, a 1-year-long project around transformation in education. From primary schools to universities, we're trying to collect stories of people, innovators like you, trying to make that shift from teacher-centric to student-centric.
Yeah, that's great. It gives me really good energy, because this is something we've also experienced in Strasbourg I've been running this institute, and one of our first goals was to identify all the people who probably wouldn't even qualify themselves as being innovators, and to let them come forward and share what they have been trying out and what they observe in terms of this shift from teacher-centered to student focus, which is at the heart of our own philosophy here in Strasbourg. But I think my colleagues would really like to know, how are you catching all these stories, and how are you bringing them together? How are you putting them out there for others to share?
Well, I think with ULAB, we try to create that infrastructure, the basic infrastructure where people can come together and learn together, but also co-create. So it's a global infrastructure where we invite people to come and learn together, but we notice that it's very important that it's locally embedded. And so you have within ULAB, people from universities from all the world coming together, but they're prototyping in their own context. And what we do is try to talk to people, the innovators in the field, and ask them for their stories. But more than words, we try to ask them to share the practices. Like, what is it really that you're doing as a teacher in the classroom, or at a principal or the president in your institution with your educators? And so we try to bring always the testimonials and the practices together so that people can listen to them and feel inspired. Yeah. What you cannot do is copy-paste. You cannot standardize. You cannot say, this is how to do it. These are the 10 steps. Follow them, copy-paste them. But what you can do is try to see, what are the patterns that we see? What are the principles that are applied, and what would that look like in my unique context? So it's more, how do I reproduce instead of how do I standardize or copy paste? Yeah. Does that make sense?
It makes a huge lot of sense. The word that really caught my attention was being inspirational for others. And I truly believe that's an important part of the work we're doing, because you know what academia is like. It's very competitive. I mean, you've got to be a top researcher, and we're always told not to copy our colleagues, or not. And everybody's trying to be on top of the hill in their research. So one of the things that I have always said about teaching, it is not only allowed to be inspired and to take in other people's work, it's also highly encouraged. That I think there's another shift we have to go through, that is from feeling that we have to keep things for ourselves because that's how we're going to survive as an academic and be the best researcher or the best professor, and this other philosophy about sharing practice and being inspired one another. And I think that is very, very important, because it's a shift in how we relate to our colleagues and to our students. And this can be sometimes challenging when competition for research funds gets really tough, which is the case, I think, globally. So I think this idea of being a source of inspiration is very present in our work in Strasbourg. And I've been trying to do similar things. Now, come in and show us what you're doing, and we'll give feedback, and we'll grow from it. But then what I'm noticing now is that we seem to be growing quite rapidly, and there's a small community that grew around what we were doing and inviting people to share, and it's been great fun. We like it very much. But now we're going to be moving into sort of second, third, I don't know what level, where these people who have been working with us at the sort of central level will be going back into their faculties or departments, and they want to take with them the philosophy, the way we are working, so that they can inspire their colleagues. And so people are now saying, well, how do we do it? How can we be a source of inspiration? So I think the first people who come in contact get the energy, but then say, oh dear, how am I going to take that out with me? and what's going to happen if I come across somebody who doesn't share these values about teaching and learning. So have you any experience in this about how do people grow within the ULab energy?
I think how you describe the process that is going on is already a beautiful example. So innovators often feel alone. But how do you overcome that? That's by coming together and creating a community.
Yes.
So in a way, we are doing that with ULab. It's a community, but everybody goes back to their context, organization, institution, family, and tries to bring in step by step, starting small, the change they would like to see. So the fact that you already have a community of people is a very strong element. And I think if you within that community can create a shared intention, like what is the intention behind this community? What is a future we collectively would like to see? And then create a space where you are safe together, like a container where you can share what is working, what is not working, and learn from each other. And also help each other. What is it that each of us can do within their own context, within their own sphere of influence? And that can be small. So there is really, we always say try to start small and then let it grow, learn by doing, and grow by doing that. You don't have to find a whole answer and then implement that.
Yeah, I think that that's very reassuring to understand that, yes, so starting small will probably help create this safe container. And I think it's important to nurture these places where people can come together and share the good bits, the more difficult parts that they're experiencing. But I thought I was also very aware of what you said about innovators do feel alone. I mean, I know sometimes I think, my God, what am I doing? I'm all on my own, and what's going to happen? And will I survive, or will I be? And so it can be very challenging, and I think that's where the idea of courage, curiosity, and courage for me seem to be two key values for this type of journey. In French, we have a metaphor which is called la tache d'huile, which is this idea of some oil spreading. I think that's also the energy we're looking for, is how do things spread and expand slowly. But what I'm getting from your message is that it's our sense of security to go out and explore. We need to feel safe within ourselves and with who we are. So have you had any considerations about that, this sort of sense of it's safe to be who I am and to go out and explore things?
Yeah, I'd like to add one word. So you spoke to curiosity and courage. I think those two are very, very important ingredients. Curiosity means that you try to always ask questions and keep asking questions, even if the answer is not what you wanted it to be or what you expected. And with courage, it's about try to just dare to make steps, one step at a time. And the word that I would like to add is compassion.
Yes.
Because there is one little pitfall that I sometimes see, and it's never intentional, but it sometimes grows that way. And that is that if community of innovators come together and change makers, and they have this safe space to share what is working, what is not working, if they lose their compassion for the system, sometimes they become more angry or rebels. And there is one thing that doesn't work with resistance, that is resisting it.
Yeah.
So if you meet resistance with resistance, it's just pushing back.
Yes.
Because being compassionate with the resistance, compassionate with the environment where you want to bring in change, even loving in a way, so that your community is a safe container, but it's not activistic.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense to me, because this is one of my concerns. Also, that when a community gets together and feels the connectedness that's between the members, there's always the pitfall of what is called group illusion, which is, we are the good ones, we're the spiritually high people. And in fact, this will be a form of resistance, or getting stuck in the truth of that reality, which I think can be take us in the exact opposite direction of where we want to go. And it's so easy to slip into this, because it is a mindset that we come across. I mean, clans and tribes are part of our culture, so it's how do we keep it open? And compassion, I find, is extremely important, because of course we're going to come across people who don't share the values, who have other views. And I think it's important to remain with the idea that everybody's doing their best in contexts that can be challenging and difficult. And if we get stuck in things where it's the bad guys and the good guys, that will just take us down a path which is where we'll find ourselves repeating the violence that we're trying to get out of. So that, I think, for the growing innovators, sometimes people say to me, I'm afraid that I'll be outcasted, that I have to step aside. So it's as if they feel that their sense of belonging or fitting into what is the main line is being threatened. And I think that can be also a hurdle we have to go over or cross. So have you come across this feeling that people are afraid that they will be outcasted or put aside?
Well, yes, of course, I see it in environments where there is a lot of power, for example, and that people have very different, that a lot is at stake, especially for those in power, keep it in a way. And where the compassion comes in is where you try to really understand where they come from. So if I would have been in the same situation, maybe I would have done the same thing. And what is it then? And when we invite people to really listen, deeply listen, one of the things is to understand deeply where everyone involved is coming from. So what are the values they are protecting? Like innovators are also protecting values. And it's when we reach that moment of deep understanding of each other's values and what we are trying to protect or what we are trying to bring in, that the real dialogue can start. It's when we talk about moving from ego to eco, the eco is not ecological, it's more ecosystem. And so by avoiding the pitfall of us against them, right, the conservatives versus the innovators, it's more like how do we start thinking as an ecosystem and trying to understand what all the different views are, and from there step into innovation. And it doesn't mean that everybody needs to be around the table when you start to innovate, but can we at least understand all the perspectives that are present?
Yeah. Thank you very much for that input. I would like to come back to what our concern is, because so far we've been talking about higher education, about the system. Of course, what I'm interested in is the student, because my philosophy of teaching and learning is to be focused on the student. And I was listening to you and I was thinking of myself and my colleagues and how we try to innovate in our teaching practices by truly and generally putting the student in the center, and it can take many forms. We've had them doing coaching circles, for instance, doing reflective practices. And what we have noticed in the first steps was that the students were finding it difficult to sort of step into this new environment. They could be suspicious. They would say, well, this is not how I have learned to learn, and they were very unbalanced by this. And with some colleagues, we've been doing some research action on how do the students perceive these changes and how are they responding to the new teaching practices. And what has come out of our first results, which of course just exploratory research, is that what the students are protecting is their self-efficacy or their self-esteem. And it made me be aware that when we change the context or the way we're going to relate or operate collectively, everybody is going to start protecting their sense of self-esteem. And that many of the things that come forward in the first is, if you change the setting, I feel challenged or threatened in my identity, and I've got to reassess myself within this new context. And it certainly came out a lot in the students who found it difficult to connect to the idea that what we were doing was full of good intentions for their learning. And in a certain sense, they couldn't believe us. And it took a lot of conversations for them to trust us and to be guided in what we were offering and to take part in the experiment and to be fully part of it. So does that resonate in your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I recognize that a lot.
Yeah.
And I think it's putting it in a time frame helps. So what we notice is that we start with bringing in these principles of learning and teaching at a very young age. It's very natural. It's very natural, doing things experimental, experience things first and then understand what has happened. So what happened in the past 10, 20 years, or maybe even 100 years, is that we shifted that very much. And the focus on learning was linked to testing. And even to a certain form of being, how you are outwardly, that takes away vulnerability very much. And so if you come in with people around university age, vulnerability is something to avoid in a way, which is linked to the age group that we were all in and recognized probably. But if you combine that you also take away the testing, but more the inquiry, those are very big patterns that you shift. And so I think when you start at a small age, it's more natural. If you then go into middle school, high school, so the age between 12 to 15, we notice that it's difficult as well. And then university. But it is because of the patterns that people have learned throughout time that we're safe. If we do this, we're good.
Yes.
If we have those points and we pass the test, we're okay. If we're cool, we're okay. And some things are severely challenged there by saying, no, we want to know who you are and what is it that you want to learn. We don't want to tell you what you need to learn and then test you whether you learned it well and then say, now you can pass on, which is the more industrial thinking. And it's bringing in inquiry, it's bringing in dialogue, it's bringing in coaching. It's like, who are you and who do you want to become? What is it that you want to learn? Those patterns are very, very different. Yeah. And I think it just takes time. I think it has to do with trust, as you say, and intention. And I think it takes time, as if that intention is right. Or where does it come from, that they really understand? I remember when we started doing this work with students, some of them said, well, how are you going to grade me? How am I going to get credits? And if I say, well, that's not what it is about, then it's like, why would I do it even? And I understand. And yet it's sad that is, how young people are taught that things work. And it takes time, I think. If they experienced it and feel how it, as a human being, as a learner, as a upgrowing professional, helps them, then I think it might open things up.
Yeah, I really agree with you, because I was thinking yesterday, I had one of my master's students who stuck with her final dissertation, and it took me a lot of time to say, I want to hear your voice. And it was all about trusting herself that she could write a paper which is, I think, I experience. And she kept saying, well, I'm not used to it. I don't know how to do it. And I said, you just have to sit down and start writing, and you start each sentence. So it was a very interesting moment, a beautiful moment, the two of us, where I said, well, could you trust me? And I'm going to suggest a way for you to start voicing what is down there, which is precious and that I want to hear. And so we came to a lovely agreement where she's going to sit 1 hour in the morning, 1 hour in the evening, and she's going to write, and whatever happens will come. And I told her to release the anxiety about the testing and grading. I said, you will get your diploma. I will assure you that you get it. But in order to get it, I want you to voice it. So I could really sense that it was all about trust, and that she was allowed to step out of what she had thought was the proper way to behave at university, and to simply be herself, and that it was okay to be herself. So I'm thinking of my colleagues who now want to take innovations into their departments. I think one of the difficulties they might be facing is we're doing this both with our students, but also with our colleagues, because our colleagues sometimes can feel challenged in their habits and routines. So I think I can now understand what the colleagues who want to step forward and do something to contribute to shifting now are thinking, oh, this is going to be a really stiff climb. But on the other hand, I feel that what you said is important. It's one step at a time, and it's one experience after another. So this means that for institutions like ours, what is important, I think, is to show what's been going on, to be able to say, to value what experiments people have been carrying out, and to not only be a safe container, but a place that will tell of the stories, like what you were saying in China. It's they're doing the stakeholders interviews, or finding out what people are doing and talking about it, making it public. So do you have any suggestions about how we could do this in how do we share these stories?
Within the university, you mean?
Yes, for instance.
Yeah, I think, in China, we're doing a lot of learning journeys, okay? Which is that we go to the edges of the education system and talk to principals or students or educators and try to find seeds of the future. And I think you could do that as well within your university, but also in other universities. So seeing what is already happening, try to capture those stories. Also look outside in the world, like in other universities or even other sectors. What is happening? And if you then collectively look at those and just do some sense making, what is it that we're seeing? What are the patterns? And what is wanting to happen? What is working well? And what does that mean about what else is possible? I think that's definitely a practice. And another layer, of course, of sharing stories is communication. So what is the minimum of infrastructure that you need, which is partly offline gatherings, and then there might be online tools to share them within the community you are forming or with international community. Finding maybe an online platform where you can share the stories, and always have some moments of sense making where you can learn together from the stories and what is it that you're seeing.
Yeah, I think this is the track we've been following, and this is why we have these yearly meetings where we can come together, share the stories, and sort of we have sort of small publications about it. One of my concerns is not to fall back into the trap of academic publications, which are sort of huge books full of nobody reads. And that is a great concern in our community, because so that it's not a patchwork of stories, but we can actually see the thread that's been so I suppose we'll just have to be creative, and we'll find our way of sharing it at
yeah. There's ways to develop to share them with each other and as inspiration, and then help each other out, shape together, collectively shape what the next step could be.
Yes, and I must say that the growing ULab community is really a good container for that, because I'm already in contact with other colleagues in other universities, and we sense that the French community is sort of coming together slowly, but I can see that as a very promising line, so that we don't feel alone in a small corner of France. So, and I think we owe the Presencing Institute and the ULab community that I feel strong ownership of being. ULab is not the MIT, it is all of us, wherever we are, whatever we are doing. And that is a great, so really thank you so much for providing these wonderful possibilities and journeys, and helping us connect to great people, and being there for us as well, whatever we're doing.
Oh, yeah. I am very happy to be connected and seeing everything that you're doing. It's fascinating, it's interesting, it's pioneering. So we actually, as I said, create the conditions, and then have the honor to see innovators step up and be in touch with them. So it's, I'm very happy, and thank you for the invitation. And I hope to stay connected and hear everything that emerges afterwards.
Yes, well, you will be. Okay, so thank you so much, Julie, for this conversation. The first of many others, who knows?
And good luck for the rest of the day.
Thank you very much.